My name is Louise. I'm turning 34 this year. After graduating from college, I got a job at what one would call a major corporation. Our company, known to just about anyone, offered a decent salary, even for new hires. However, a high salary came with a price. I had to travel for business or training about half of the month, and working overtime and on holidays was usual. It was a pretty tough job, but I felt fulfilled. By the time I turned 28, I was promoted to be the department head, a quick progression, pretty rare for a woman. 4 years ago, I married my boyfriend of 2 years, Brian. We met through a mutual friend. I wasn't particularly interested in dating, but my friend, concerned for me, introduced him to me. I had no particular desire to marry, thinking that I could live my entire life single. Brian, however, said from the start, "I want to get married soon. I want kids too. Raising them when we're older is going to be harder, right?" I didn't want children, and I found the thought of getting married to be absurd when we hardly knew each other. Plus, I had just been promoted and couldn't think about getting married and pregnant. Even when Brian brought up the topic of marriage, I would gently reject it, saying, "You're rushing. We need to get to know each other better. Besides, with marriage, it's not gonna be just about us." To this, Brian suggested, Okay. Then let's get married after dating for 2 years? By then, we'd know each other well, right? At the time, I thought we wouldn't last 2 years, but in the end, we dated for 2 years, and then got married. During our relationship, he was faithful, wasn't a gambler, and was sincere and kind to me. I saw him as a hardworking and diligent person when it came to his work. However, his great ego was something that had always bothered me a bit. When a senior at work would point out something to him, he would rant at home, saying, "I did it because I thought it was the best, but they act so bossy. I don't have to be told what to do." Listening to him in detail, it was clear he was being called out for his mistake, but it seemed like he couldn't stand being criticized, whether it was by a superior or not. When we decided to have dinner with both families for greetings, for some reason, he picked a restaurant that charged over $200 per person and asked me to pay half since it was so expensive. I suggested a less expensive place, but Brian insisted. "This is important. If I choose a cheap restaurant, they'll think I'm stingy," and wouldn't listen. If that's the case, he should handle it all himself. But he said, "I can't cover 8 people with my salary. At most, maybe 3. So please cover the remaining 5, and ended up asking me to pay more than half. We had 4 people from each family, making a total of 8. So Brian was saying we should meet at an over $200 per person restaurant, even though he couldn't even cover his family's share. I wasn't quite happy when he brought up this plan, and I was even more puzzled when he told everyone at the dinner, "Don't worry about the bill today, I'll take care of it." But everyone seemed happy, and I thought I should let him take the lead in this situation. So I swallowed my words. Looking back, I think I might have made a mistake. I regret not calling off my marriage to Brian, a man so full of himself. Brian's attitude towards me changed completely after we got married. He began to talk to me in a condescending manner all the time. Before we got married, he knew I was busy with work and said he would help with household chores. However, after we got married, he started saying things like, "What would the neighbors think if they saw a man hanging out laundry? Besides, household chores are a woman's job, right? I'm out working hard, so let me relax at home." He never lifted a finger to help, no matter how busy I was. Does he really think people would be fazed by seeing a man putting out laundry? I was fed up with his domineering attitude, but I didn't mind doing the housework, so I could tolerate it. What ticked me off was the fact that Brian was giving money to his parents. Although Brian's parents were farmers, they seemed to be struggling to make ends meet. Seemed like they never made much in the past either. And now that they were nearing their 70s, farming was becoming more difficult. Because of this, they would frequently call Brian to send them some money. At first, I thought it couldn't be helped since they were struggling, but within 6 months of getting married, Brian started giving all his salary to his parents. Brian wouldn't contribute any money for our living expenses. I once told him, "This is so much! It's ridiculous to cover all the living expenses with my salary alone." But Brian replied, How can you say such a thing when my family is in trouble? They're your family too. Besides, you make more money than I do, so you should be able to live just fine. And wouldn't listen to me. On the phone with his parents, Brian always said, "It's fine, I'm taking care of it with my salary. I won't let her say anything about it." It was as if he was only sending part of his salary. But in fact, he was giving all of his salary to his parents. He had no money left for himself and started asking me for pocket money, saying, "Can you give me about $200? I won't even be able to afford lunch at this rate." I finally decided I couldn't continue living this way and suggested, "Let's decide on a monthly limit for the amount we send to your parents. Please find a way to cover your lunch expenses on your own." But Brian would always say, "Got it, we'll do that." But he kept sending all his monthly salary to his parents. That was the one thing I couldn't stand, no matter what. One day, I had to be away from home for about 2 weeks for a business trip. From Brian, I got a, "What? 2 weeks? What am I gonna eat then? And what about my laundry?" Even though he knew I had a job that required frequent travel. When I, annoyed at his childishness, said, "Figure it out yourself, you're a grown man. If you can't, why don't you go home while I'm away? You'll eat good there, right?" Brian reluctantly agreed. 2 weeks later, when I returned home, for some reason, Brian's sister Elizabeth was at home. She lived a little away from us, and we hadn't seen each other since our wedding. As I was wondering if something had happened, Elizabeth, seeing my face, said, "Hi, Louise. It's been a while." "Oh, that's right. The money. It was a lifesaver. Thank you so much." With a beaming smile, saying things that made no sense to me. Without even having the time to put away my luggage, I asked Elizabeth, "Money? What are you talking about?" Then Elizabeth, without any hesitation, said, "Huh? Brian said that since you have some savings, he'd provide for my startup capital. He told me not to worry because that's at least $1 million. I didn't understand at all. At that moment, Brian entered the room holding my passbook and seal. As soon as Brian saw my face, he said, "Oh, welcome back. Good timing. I'm going to give your savings to Elizabeth. You know Elizabeth, she's a nail artist, right? She's always wanted her own shop. It seems like she's been saving her own money, but she's about $1 million short. I remember that the savings you've had since you were single is exactly $1 million, so I told her to come get it." He then handed the passbook and seal to Elizabeth, saying with a smile, "You're lucky. This will make your dream come true. Be grateful, okay?" I couldn't hold back anymore and snapped, "What are you talking about? That's my money. Why are you deciding that on your own? I mean, I could understand if you said you'd lend it. We'd need a promissory note and a promise to pay back a certain amount each month, right? Without doing any of that, what do you mean you're going to give away someone else's savings?" I then took the passbook and seal back from Elizabeth. Brian looked at me and said, "What? We're family, aren't we? It's ridiculous to write a promissory note for family members. Besides, we're not lending this. We're giving it. You don't even have a hobby because you're always working, right? It's a waste to just hold on to money. Elizabeth has a dream. Isn't it more meaningful to use it to make that dream come true?" And then he glared at me. Upon hearing Brian's words, I understood he was someone I couldn't communicate with. Just when I thought it was a waste of time to continue the conversation, Brian said, "This money is too good for you, so I'm giving it to Elizabeth. You'd only waste it. You can just work and save up again. Understand? If you still want to argue, we'll get divorced." Seeing this as an opportunity, an idea sparked my mind. I quickly responded, "All right. Let's get a divorce. I'll write up the divorce papers and send them to you. I'll come pick up my things soon. Until the divorce is finalized, I'll stay at a hotel. Bye for now." And with that, I grabbed my luggage from a business trip and left the house swiftly. Brian was stunned by my sudden decision, but after a while, he sent multiple texts, saying things like, "You can still come back if you apologize now," and "Elizabeth says she'll forgive you for what happened today, as long as you give her the money. So stop being stubborn and come back." I ignored all his texts. Who does he think he is? The next day, I went to the city hall and mailed the signed divorce papers back home. Even then, he kept texting me, saying things like, "Are you really sure about this? I'm going to submit the divorce papers, okay?" I only responded with, "Please submit them as soon as possible," and ignored all the other texts. The divorce with Brian was finalized sooner than I thought. A week after the divorce was finalized, I timed it with when Brian was at work and moved my things to my new house. When Brian texted me about submitting the divorce papers, he had said, "I feel great being able to divorce an ugly woman like you. We are strangers now. Make sure you divide our property properly since we're divorced." So, I didn't take most of the furniture and appliances. At the same time, I deposited half of the small savings I had accumulated during our marriage into his bank account and left it there. That night, I got multiple calls from Brian. At first, I ignored them thinking, here we go. But after a while, I started getting calls from Elizabeth too. Finally, I picked up the damn phone and Brian immediately yelled, "Hey, what happened to our property division? This is ridiculous. There's only $800 in this account." Well, I was thinking to myself, it's exactly as I expected. I told Brian, "See, I did split the property. We originally had $1,600 in our joint account, right? I left you with half of it, so $800. And all the furniture and appliances were purchased after our marriage, so I left them all behind. That's a fair property division too, isn't it?" Just to make it clear, I got less than you. But Brian was not convinced. He said, "What are you talking about? You're supposed to have $1 million in your savings, right? So half of that, $500,000, should be mine, right? Plus, you have an inheritance from your grandpa died, right? That inheritance should be half mine too." I was flabbergasted and couldn't help but laugh. I saw this coming. Otherwise, I don't think Brian would have agreed to file for divorce so easily. I managed to hold back my laughter and explained, "Listen, Brian, division of property refers to the division of marital assets. My savings from when I was single and the inheritance I received do not fall under marital assets. I don't know who you heard about property division from, but I consulted a lawyer and split our marital assets properly. The money we saved after getting married was actually all earned by me. You never contributed to our household expenses, remember? Be grateful that I even divided that." Brian said, "You're lying! There's no way that's true! You can't fool me! Hand it over properly, or I'll sue you!" He desperately yelled with a shaky voice, but I calmly told him, "Go ahead. If you can sue me, then do it. I haven't deceived you in any way. Plus, I've done the property division fairly. I'm not afraid of being sued." Upon hearing this, Brian flusteredly said, "Wait! Let's forget about the divorce. I was wrong. Come back to me." He completely backpedaled and asked for reconciliation. I replied, "What are you talking about? The divorce has already been finalized, and I have absolutely no intention of going back. This is not a joke." And then I added, "Since this is the end, let me tell you, if you plan on continuing to live there, you have to pay the rent yourself. The rent is about $1,800 a month. You probably didn't know because you've never paid for it." When I said this, Brian replied in a weak voice, "There's no way I can afford that." If he can't pay, then he just has to leave. That's none of my business anymore. After that, it seems that Brian went back to his parents' house because he couldn't afford the rent. Unable to come up with the moving expenses, Brian sold the furniture and appliances I left behind for moving expenses. His parents thought Brian was making a decent amount of money and happily welcomed him, thinking it would make their lives easier. But in reality, Brian wasn't able to give them as much money as when he was with me, and he seems to be quite uncomfortable staying there. Elizabeth had been told by Brian not to worry about money and had started preparing to start her own business. But since she couldn't get a penny of my savings, it seems that the startup plan came to a halt. Moreover, it seems that she suffered a loss because she had to cancel the preparations she had started. Brian seems to have been given a hard time by Elizabeth as well, but that's not my problem. I'm currently focusing on my work while living alone. I've had enough of marriage. I still get messages from Brian saying he wants to get back together, but I completely ignore them. It was kind of funny to hear him report his situation to me every now and then, so I let it be. But I'm planning to block him soon.